In the opulent halls of Windsor, tension simmers beneath the glittering chandeliers. A royal ceremony meant to symbolize unity takes a turn no one expected. As Princess Anne enters with silent dignity, unseen forces are already at play, and in the corner, Camilla's gaze lingers on Catherine with something darker than rivalry. What started as whispers would soon shatter the room. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It had been billed as a celebration of solidarity, an elegant gathering of senior royals aimed at showcasing the monarchy's resilience in a shifting age. The corridors buzzed with anticipation, but beneath the perfectly choreographed smiles and carefully chosen attire, there were fractures subtle but widening. The ceremony's core theme, strength through unity, now echoed with an unintended irony. Camilla had arrived earlier than expected, flanked by a circle of aides who seemed unusually alert. As guests filtered in, Catherine appeared radiant, yet modest. Her gown, a refined blend of modern grace and regal tradition, caught eyes immediately, not for extravagance, but for symbolism. It whispered dignity, lineage, and quiet strength. Camilla's gaze, however, lingered too long, her expression unreadable. Princess Anne, always a figure of discipline and focus, entered with her usual stoicism. But to the trained eye, her body language betrayed something deeper: restraint, calculation, and perhaps a guarded unease. She scanned the room like a sentinel, her eyes briefly locking with Catherine's in what many now describe as a silent exchange of mutual understanding. There was no smile, only a recognition that this day, this setting, was teetering on the edge of something fragile. Minutes before the ceremony was due to commence, Camilla was seen leaning close to a trusted aide, whispering with a peculiar smile. The aide's startled expression wasn't missed. Their exchange was swift, almost coded, but not quite discreet enough. Nearby, guests stiffened, sensing the energy in the room shift. It wasn't the words they couldn't be heard, but the tone, the delivery, the look that followed. And most importantly, where Camilla's gaze landed after she spoke straight toward Catherine. Catherine, with poise that has long defined her public presence, continued her quiet interactions. But the room had already begun to hold its breath. A weight, subtle yet palpable, began to blanket the atmosphere. Even as musicians prepared their opening notes and the crowd repositioned for the ceremonial procession, unease settled like a shadow behind the splendor. Anne remained still, observant. Yet something in her manner suggested she was preparing herself not just for the event ahead, but for a response, a decision. Those who know her best later claimed she looked ready to intervene, though no one yet knew in what capacity. The sequence of subtle provocations, Camilla's timing, her glance, the whispered remark, felt less like coincidence and more like intent. But just as the ceremony's first notes echoed through the grand hall, a single exchange would erupt into a royal turning point no one could have imagined. At a glance, everything seemed pristine, a kingdom on display. But beneath Camilla's practiced smile was a calculated message, and when her words finally slipped past protocol, the mask shattered. What exactly did she say about Catherine, and who overheard it? The orchestra played softly as the ceremony unfolded, but the tension between two of the most powerful women in the royal family had reached its boiling point. As senior royals adjusted to their places and ceremonial proceedings began, Camilla leaned toward her aide and uttered a remark that would detonate through the palace like a hidden charge. What may have seemed like casual commentary at first took on a sharpness that was unmistakable to anyone within earshot. It wasn't loud, but it was precise and deeply cutting. In the royal world, words don't need volume to cause chaos. One phrase, softly delivered, can sink decades of diplomacy. A witness just a few feet away would later tell confidantes that Camilla's voice held a chilling mix of sarcasm and superiority. The exact phrase remained elusive until lip readers scoured the footage days later, revealing fragments whispered with icy clarity. Trying too hard. Not quite royal. For those who understood the context, this was not just a passing comment, it was a deliberate jab, a blow aimed directly at Catherine's identity and role within the monarchy. And it wasn't the first time. The history between Camilla and Catherine had always simmered beneath the surface. But this time, the simmer boiled over. Catherine, hearing just enough to understand the intent, remained composed. But those closest to her saw the shift. The brief flicker in her eyes, the slight tightening of her mouth. Grace under fire had always been her armor, and once again, she wore it like a second skin. Still, the moment stung, and her silence in that instant spoke louder than any rebuke. Across the room, however, another royal was not so quiet inside. Princess Anne's face, caught by a discreet camera angle, captured the unfolding reaction in real time. Her features froze, then hardened. There was no mistaking the look disbelief, followed by unfiltered fury. Anne had never been one to tolerate cruelty dressed as commentary, especially not in public, and especially not towards someone she had grown to admire. Catherine's quiet strength, her unwavering commitment, her ability to uphold the crown without demanding the spotlight, these were traits Anne respected deeply. And to see them mocked so casually, so cruelly, struck a nerve that would not remain still. The energy in the room shifted almost instantly. A chill crept through the air despite the chandeliers and polished silver. Conversations slowed, glances darted across the hall. Guests who had missed the remark felt the unease but couldn't name it. Those who had heard it remained quiet, shocked, unsure whether to intervene or pretend it hadn't happened. But the damage had already taken root. This wasn't just about a single insult. It was about the pattern. Camilla's long-standing rivalry with Catherine, rooted in perception, position, and power, had once again breached the surface. And this time, it happened before an audience of dignitaries, royals, and the press. If her aim was to diminish Catherine, the move had backfired, because while Catherine held her ground with elegance, another royal was preparing to respond in a way no one anticipated. As murmurs spread through the polished room like wildfire, Princess Anne made a decision that would stun everyone, including the monarch himself. No one moves during a royal address until now. Princess Anne, protector of the monarchy's integrity, stood up. Eyes turned. Conversations halted. It wasn't part of the program, but it was a moment no one would ever forget. The ceremony had reached a crescendo, a carefully choreographed moment of tribute, symbolism, and restraint. Yet amidst the rhythm of protocol, one act broke the unspoken code that governs royal silence. Princess Anne rose. There was no announcement, no warning, no attempt to mask her displeasure. She stood with the full weight of her legacy behind her, every inch of her posture declaring that something sacred had just been violated. The room, already holding its breath from the earlier incident, now seemed suspended in time. Aides froze, dignitaries exchanged sharp glances, and the orchestra faltered. All eyes turned toward the Princess Royal, whose expression burned with purpose. She didn't glance at the crowd. She didn't need to. Her gaze was locked cold, unwavering, and aimed directly at Queen Camilla. The implication was instant and devastating. There were no words, but there was no doubt. It wasn't confusion, nor fatigue, nor illness that moved Anne from her place. It was protest, an unspoken declaration that whatever had just transpired, whatever words had been uttered, whatever disrespect had been cloaked in sarcasm, was intolerable. Even King Charles III, seated at the helm of the event, appeared stunned. His brows furrowed, his lips parted, but nothing was said. He watched as his only sister, the one who had never once broken protocol in public, walked out with quiet fury. But Anne wasn't alone in her sentiment. As she passed Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, the latter gave a subtle but unmistakable nod, a silent confirmation that Anne was not acting impulsively. It was a moment of solidarity, fragile but firm, amid a court still reeling from the insult aimed at Catherine. Sophie, known for her discretion, rarely took visible sides. Yet in that instant, her eyes conveyed support, understanding, and even gratitude. She knew Anne wasn't just walking out. She was making a statement for every royal who still believed in honor, dignity, and restraint. Behind the scenes, chaos erupted. Press cameras caught the entire movement Anne's face, her exit, and the ripple effect it caused. Palace staff rushed to signal photographers to lower their lenses, but it was too late. The footage had been recorded, and it would not be contained. Aides scrambled to find answers, to anticipate the media frenzy that would surely follow. Rumours had already begun to circulate, but Anne's act turned speculation into headline material. One senior advisor attempted to intercept Anne moments later, perhaps hoping to mitigate the situation or persuade her to return. But Anne, typically reserved, dismissed the attempt with a rare flash of emotion. Not anger, not rage, but a controlled, deep disappointment. It was the kind of look that silenced even the boldest among them. A reminder that this was not just about appearances. It was about values. And in that moment, Anne reminded the monarchy of what it meant to stand for something, even when the cost was high. But while Anne left in protest, the storm inside the palace had only begun to brew, and Catherine was now at the very centre. Where others might have crumbled, Catherine stood tall. As the world watched, she chose elegance over outrage. But behind closed doors, her silence was anything but weakness. It was the calm before a reckoning. The ceremony continued, but the atmosphere had fractured. The absence of Princess Anne lingered like an unspoken warning, casting a shadow over every word that followed. And there, at the heart of it all, stood Catherine, still in place, still dignified, still holding the gaze of a nation. Her decision to remain wasn't passivity. It was deliberate. Every second she stayed, every breath she took under the weight of public scrutiny was a message. She would not be driven out. Not by whispers, not by smirks, and certainly not by a calculated insult dressed as a joke. If Camilla had expected a visible reaction, an emotional stumble, a falter, she was left disappointed. Yet even Catherine's calm had its limits. The strain didn't shout, it whispered. A clenched hand resting firmly against her lap, a slight but steady tightening of the jaw. These weren't tells of weakness, but of control. Of someone feeling every barb, every glance, every unsaid judgment, and still choosing grace over vengeance. Behind her composed expression was a storm of emotion, kept in check not for herself, but for the crown she had committed her life to uphold. She wasn't just enduring the moment, she was outlasting it. As the final speeches echoed and formalities resumed, a few members of the royal family cautiously moved closer. They didn't draw attention, but their presence was unmistakable. Their gestures weren't grand, but they were powerful. Within the monarchy's walls, silence speaks volumes. And in those moments, Catherine was surrounded by a growing current of quiet solidarity. What made the tension more piercing was what came next, an image quickly captured and even more quickly scrubbed. A single frame of Camilla, her lips curled in what could only be described as a smirk. It lasted less than a second, but in the age of instant media, it was long enough. The palace communications team moved swiftly, replacing footage, redirecting press inquiries, sanitizing what they could. But some moments, once seen, cannot be unseen. The contrast was staggering. Catherine poised, wounded but resilient, Camilla amused, detached, and calculating. It was a chilling snapshot of the power dynamics, silently unraveling beneath the surface. Yet Catherine said nothing. Not then. Not to the press, not to courtiers, not even in veiled statements. Because she understood something few others grasped. Words in the wrong moment can diminish the truth, and the truth was already louder than anything she could say. Her restraint wasn't surrender, it was strategy. A choice to let others make their move first. To let their actions speak before she chose to respond. And as tensions mounted and allies quietly aligned themselves, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't just a personal affront. An attempt to diminish, to humiliate, to provoke, but Catherine refused to give Camilla the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Not here. Not now. Because the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And while Catherine remained in her place, statuesque and resolute, others were already moving behind the scenes, preparing to defend what had just been threatened. Behind the palace doors, the aftermath spiraled into private confrontations, and power plays none more intense than what unfolded between Anne and Camilla. When the doors closed, the gloves came off. Princess Anne didn't wait for decorum. What followed was a clash, years in the making, one woman defending tradition, the other demanding dominance. And this time, Anne wouldn't back down. It began with a direct request: no aides, no buffers, no palace intermediaries. Anne demanded a private audience with Queen Camilla, and she demanded it now, not tomorrow, not after press advisors crafted statements. Now. The Queen, caught off guard by Anne's unrelenting urgency, accepted. But what unfolded behind those locked doors would shatter whatever illusion of harmony remained. Raised voices, muffled but unmistakable, rang through the hallway. Senior staff, stationed nearby, dared not approach. This wasn't just a conversation. It was confrontation, in its rawest form, two women standing atop the royal pyramid, but facing entirely opposite directions. Anne did not mince words. She accused Camilla point blank of orchestrating humiliation, not just of Catherine, but of the family itself. "You've fractured what little unity we had left," she is reported to have said, her voice shaking with both fury and conviction. For Anne, this was not about petty rivalries or private slights. It was about the betrayal of something larger than monarchy's integrity. She didn't confront as a sister-in-law. She came as the crown's fiercest defender. And she reminded Camilla, in no uncertain terms, that being queen consort didn't mean being untouchable. Camilla, for her part, didn't cower. She fired back, calling the moment a misinterpreted joke, a careless phrase taken too seriously. But the excuse only fueled the fire. Anne's retort was swift, scathing, unforgettable. "This isn't a family that mocks, especially not in public." That line, as whispered later among palace insiders, left Camilla speechless for a moment. And in that silence, the depth of Anne's fury became impossible to dismiss. The altercation had no witnesses, but those closest to the room said the atmosphere afterward was thick with unease. Staff who had served through decades of royal tensions admitted they'd never seen Anne like that, calm in public, explosive in private, and unrelenting in her defense of Catherine. No one quite knew how to proceed. Whispers circulated faster than official memos. Some feared that Camilla had finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Others wondered how Charles would navigate a storm that now directly involved his sister, his wife, and his heir's wife, all locked in a spiraling vortex of blame, silence, and unresolved fury. It wasn't just about the words spoken during the ceremony. It was about the long-standing undercurrents of resentment, competition, and power. Camilla's rise had never been universally accepted, and Anne, who had remained steadfastly loyal to tradition, could no longer ignore the cost of silence. The confrontation wasn't a moment, it was a reckoning. A signal to the entire royal household that lines had been drawn, and once drawn, they would not fade easily. But Camilla's next move would ignite an even deeper scandal, one that pulled in Charles himself and tested the fragile core of royal allegiance. For a king, neutrality is duty. But when your sister storms out and your queen is at the heart of the scandal, where do you draw the line? For Charles, the moment of choice had arrived, and every path risked war within the House of Windsor. In the days that followed the ceremony, the walls of Buckingham Palace became a pressure cooker of quiet confrontations, hushed consultations, and mounting dread. King Charles found himself cornered by the two forces he could least afford to alienate: his sister, Princess Anne, whose moral compass had long anchored the institution, and his wife, Queen Camilla, whose actions had become the lightning rod of royal outrage. He moved between chambers and advisors, but the question remained the same. Should he act, or should he hope silence would buy time? But time was no longer on his side. He reportedly requested a private conversation with Catherine, a gesture that surprised even his closest staff. Away from the advisors and cameras, he asked the question many believed he had avoided for far too long. "Were you hurt by what happened that day?" Catherine, poised even in privacy, didn't accuse, didn't cry, didn't plead. She answered with diplomacy, with the kind of grace that defined her public life. but the weight in her voice was unmistakable. "I'm not hurt," she said softly. "I'm disappointed." That word, as sources confirmed later, lingered with Charles longer than any other. Disappointed. It was a verdict he couldn't ignore, and yet, one he didn't know how to respond to without setting his world further ablaze. His advisors were split down the middle. Some argued that to protect the monarchy's image, he must issue a brief, neutral statement acknowledging the ceremony's misunderstandings. Others warned that any public acknowledgement would inflame the press and expose internal fractures. But behind the strategy was fear of choosing a side, fear of implying that Catherine, now a symbol of quiet strength, had been wronged. And even more terrifying, fear of confirming that Camilla had become a liability rather than an asset to the crown. The longer he waited, the more paralyzed he became. His silence, once a tool of diplomacy, had turned into a weapon against his own credibility. Inside the palace, Queen Camilla was growing increasingly defiant. She dismissed the backlash as overblown, insisted that Anne had overreacted, and doubled down in private that the entire debacle was manufactured by media hungry for scandal. "Put it to rest," she told those around her, with a tone that brooked no argument. But Charles, for the first time in months, didn't echo her. He hesitated. He watched the polls, the headlines, the social media wildfire spreading beyond their control. And worst of all, he saw the subtle shift within his own family. The quiet solidarity forming around Catherine, the respectful distance growing from Anne, and the whispers from Edward and Sophie that things could not continue as they had. In his heart, Charles knew that if he sided with Camilla, he might alienate the very people who had held the monarchy together in its most turbulent years. But if he rebuked her, even subtly, the consequences in his private life would be irreversible. The man who had spent decades climbing the path to kingship now faced a decision more personal, more divisive, than any act of governance. Every hour that passed without clarity deepened the fissure, and the crown, once again, hung in the balance. But the palace couldn't silence what was already spreading across media outlets, and the public had already chosen sides. They tried to bury it, but someone had other plans. The leaked clip of Camilla's mocking remark hit the internet like a lightning strike, and what followed was a public reckoning the palace couldn't control. It started quietly, an anonymous account posting a grainy but unmistakable video clip. In it, Camilla's voice was barely audible, but the expression, the gesture, and the aftermath left no doubt. Her words, mocking Catherine in the midst of a formal royal ceremony, were no longer rumour. They were fact, and they were on every screen within hours. Alongside the audio was a follow-up clip of Princess Anne rising and exiting the room with chilling resolve. Together, these two moments became the most viewed royal footage since Queen Elizabeth's funeral. The palace had lost control of the narrative, and the internet was writing its own version of the truth, one that showed Camilla not as the dignified consort, but as the instigator of humiliation. Within minutes, hashtags exploded across social media. Number Stand With Anne became a global banner of solidarity, and Number Respect Catherine trended in nearly every English-speaking country. TikTokers dissected facial cues. Twitter became a battlefield. Instagram flooded with tributes to Catherine's composure and Anne's defiance. But it didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, palace staff, normally bound by strict codes of silence, began leaking sentiments through unofficial channels. Statements appeared in trusted royal forums and outlets from insiders close to the matter. One described Catherine as the embodiment of duty. Another revealed that Anne had been holding back for far too long. These weren't random voices, they were calculated signals from within the monarchy itself, and they pointed to one truth. A divide had formed, and Catherine now held the moral high ground. Camilla, once seen as a survivor of scandal turned symbol of stability, found herself cornered by a tidal wave of condemnation. Editorials skewered her judgment. Public figures weighed in. Even traditionally royal-friendly tabloids turned critical. Headlines questioned her future influence. Talk shows debated whether she had become a liability. What was once palace gossip had become a national crisis of perception. And as the pressure mounted, one question refused to die. Would Camilla apologize? The calls came from all directions: commentators, columnists, even former royals, each urging the Queen Consort to issue a formal apology to the Princess of Wales. But as Camilla retreated behind palace walls, the silence only deepened public outrage. Every day, without acknowledgement, chipped away at the monarchy's carefully crafted image. And behind closed doors, the firm itself began to tremble. Crisis teams were activated. Communications advisors worked around the clock. But no statement could erase what the world had already seen. A crown divided, a queen consort smirking, and a princess standing alone. The monarchy, once seen as impervious to scandal, was now dancing at the edge of public confidence. It wasn't just about a remark anymore. It was about respect, image, and a growing realization that the royal family was losing control of its own story. The people had spoken, and they weren't siding with Camilla. And just when it seemed the fallout had reached its peak, Princess Anne returned with one final defining gesture. No words were spoken. None were needed. Princess Anne, always the silent force of the monarchy, made her stance known with a single, powerful act, and the world understood exactly what it meant. Exactly 1 week after the scandal broke, Princess Anne re-emerged at a public engagement, a veterans' commemoration event she had attended for decades without fail. But this year, all eyes were not on the event itself. They were on what Anne wore. Clipped to her lapel, gleaming unmistakably under the bright daylight, was a brooch that hadn't been seen in years. It wasn't just any royal accessory. It was the one gifted to her by Queen Elizabeth II, a brooch the late monarch had once worn during a particularly controversial moment in her reign, and later passed to Diana during a time when she was being silenced by the very system she served. Its reappearance now was no accident. It was a statement subtle, symbolic, and seismic, but Anne didn't come alone. Walking beside her, without a single press release or palace bulletin announcing the pairing, was Catherine, Princess of Wales. Side by side, they moved through the ceremony in perfect synchrony. Not a single glance exchanged between them, not a single word caught by the press. But the message could not have been louder. This was unity, this was alliance, and this was defiance against the division, the whispers, the smirks, and the silence that had engulfed them for days. Body language experts analyzed every frame, every step. One headline read, "Anne chooses Catherine." Another simply called it, "The royal walk that changed everything." The significance of that brooch was not lost on anyone. It had been used throughout its history as an emblem of resistance, a quiet protest against internal injustice cloaked in royal ceremony. That Anne chose this moment, this woman, to display its legacy was a move as deliberate as it was daring. For decades, Anne had served the monarchy with unshakable loyalty, rarely inserting herself into drama, rarely making headlines. And now, without uttering a word, she had taken a side. She had made it known to the nation, and more importantly to the palace, that the Princess of Wales would not be isolated in silence. Insiders began to reveal that Anne had been meeting privately with Catherine more frequently in the days since the confrontation. One source close to the household shared that Anne had taken on a quiet role as Catherine's chief counsellor, not in title, but in truth. She had seen the danger of leaving women like Catherine alone to weather the politics of royal hierarchy, and she would not allow history to repeat itself. Not this time. The public, still reeling from the scandal, embraced the moment as a rare sign of clarity within the fog of palace intrigue. The symbolism of it all, the brooch, the walk, the silence, was so exact, so perfectly delivered, that even palace communications couldn't match it. For all the damage that had been done in recent weeks, this one act shifted the energy, not in resolution, but in momentum. It confirmed what many had begun to feel, a changing of the tide. And at its center, two women, one seasoned by duty, the other shaped by resilience, had quietly redrawn the lines of power. Yet, even with support mounting behind Catherine, the storm has only paused, and behind the palace walls, Camilla prepares a response of her own. She may have been cornered, but Queen Camilla isn't finished. Rumors swirl of secret meetings, strategic reshuffles, and one last chance to reassert control. Will this lead to reconciliation or the beginning of a full-blown royal Cold War? In the aftermath of public outrage and Anne's symbolic alignment with Catherine, Camilla retreated not in surrender, but in recalibration. According to multiple palace insiders, a series of private meetings were quietly arranged, held not in public chambers, but behind heavily guarded doors in lesser-known royal residences. Trusted courtiers, long-time allies, and those whose loyalty had never been in question were summoned. These weren't discussions of reconciliation, they were strategy sessions. The Queen Consort was assessing damage, counting her allies, and preparing a counter-move. She knew the storm wasn't over. If anything, it was just shifting direction. For Camilla, the time for charm had passed. This was about survival. Behind the scenes, Charles walked a fragile tightrope. While he refrained from public judgment, those closest to the king revealed he had pleaded privately with Camilla to issue a discreet apology to Catherine. Nothing formal, nothing public, just enough to cool the flames and restore balance. But Camilla refused. She believed an apology would set a precedent of weakness, that it would grant Catherine a moral crown no one could take back. And more than anything, Camilla feared being seen as losing control of her narrative. To her, this wasn't just about a comment, it was about power, about legacy. And she wasn't willing to yield. But her resistance came at a cost. Within the palace, a divide was hardening. One faction quietly aligned behind Anne and Catherine, believing the monarchy's future depended on modern grace and public trust. The other, smaller and shrinking, clung to tradition and hierarchy, still defending Camilla's right to be unchallenged. What had once been whispered became entrenched. Loyalty was no longer assumed, it was declared. And the House of Windsor, which had endured scandal, abdication, and tragedy, now faced a silent fracture running through its core. Catherine, still poised and reserved, did not escalate. She attended her duties with the same quiet strength that had earned her the nation's respect. But those watching closely noticed a shift. Her movements were more calculated, her allies more visible. She wasn't retreating. She was waiting. Anne, meanwhile, had become something of a quiet enforcer. Her presence in meetings carried a new weight. When she spoke, others listened. And when she remained silent, her disapproval thundered louder than any speech. This wasn't just a show of sisterly support. It was a warning. The old power dynamics had shifted. And now, on the horizon, looms the next major event, a formal royal engagement where all three women will appear side by side once more. The anticipation is electric. Cameras will capture everything. Body language will be dissected, and one wrong glance could ignite another explosion. The public is watching, the courtiers are whispering, and behind the scenes, the stakes have never been higher. The monarchy may have endured centuries, but this clash of queens could change its future forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.